Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you and welcome. I'm Father Mitch Pacwa, and welcome to Threshold of Hope, the program where we bring you the writings of Pope John Paul the Great. Before we get to some of your emails, I want to mention that today is the feast of the dedication of the Lateran Basilica. And this is the Cathedral Church of Rome. The original church was a basilica, that is a royal palace for the king. And Constantine gave it over to the Pope to use as his cathedral church. And instead of having the place where the king sits, it has the place where Christ is. So the tabernacle would be in the back, and the altar would be there, so that Christ is the new king. And this came at the end of the great persecution of Diocletian. So this is a great kind of feast day of victory. And you can see how beautifully the church is decorated. It's a stunning, stunning cathedral. And you have a sense of how Christ was able to be victorious over the persecution by the Emperor Diocletian. The worst persecution the Romans ever did. It was the last one and the worst one. And that was part of the victory spoils. Also, speaking of persecutions, I want to make sure that all of us have our prayers go out to the Christians of the different denominations, in particular the Catholics, the Syriac Catholics in Iraq. 2 Sundays ago on the Feast of All Saints' Day, gunmen burst into Our Lady of Salvation, the Syrian Catholic Cathedral in Baghdad during the Sunday Mass. And over 100 people were held as hostages. In the end, 58 people were killed, including 3 priests. Father Wasim Sabiya, Father Tayyir Saad Abdul, and Father Raphael Qatin. So this is a horrible loss for that church, to have their liturgy interrupted, their lay people and their priests killed. Every time we lose somebody this way through a martyrdom such as this, in this case to the terrorists, this is a horrible loss. Let's keep the church in the Middle East in our prayers, especially the church in Iraq, which has been undergoing a great deal of horrible persecution. And we want to keep that very much in the forefront of our prayers to strengthen them, and also for us to be strengthened by them. And their example and their fidelity in the midst of this persecution is exemplary for us. And we who have it very easy at this stage in our lives should also make sure that we look to them as models for our own faith. All right, now we want to take a look at some of your emails. Remember, you can send us emails by writing to threshold@EWTN.com. First email. Dear Father Mitch, I was recently asked if our Lord knew that he was to suffer and die for our sins, and did so willingly. Why then on the cross did he cry out the quote from the Scriptures, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? John from Massachusetts. There are 2 things. First of all, John, Christ knew what was going to happen to him. He was well aware of the suffering he would have to endure. He said it many times in the Gospels. He predicted it. But even still, when you're undergoing the actual suffering, it's not like anticipating it. The undergoing of the suffering drew out from him this cry. But secondly, and this is the more important point, this quote is from Psalm 22. And in Psalm 22, it mentions, they have numbered all my bones. They have nailed my hands and my feet. And they have cast lots for my garments. In other words, he's recognizing that what he's undergoing on the cross fulfills Psalm 22. The things said there were happening to him. His hands and feet were nailed. His bones were shown through the scourging, and the soldiers threw dice for his garments. So this was a prophetic psalm, and he's making it very clear that this is now being fulfilled. Another part, too, is that in the second part of the psalm, it's a psalm of praise and a very Eucharistically oriented psalm. So it also fits the glory of the resurrection and Christ celebrating the Eucharist after the resurrection. So it's a very rich psalm. I urge you to read Psalm 22 and think about the psalm and what Christ underwent. And then you'll see that it's a prophetic psalm, and he was speaking prophetically. Second one. Father Mitch, I watched your show on Anglicanorum Cetibus with great interest. This is on welcoming the Anglicans into the Catholic Church. But something you said has me wondering. You mentioned that the Anglicans will be able to keep their own liturgical books for the liturgy and sacraments because their liturgical traditions and their music go back hundreds of years and, quote, nourish the faith of the members and are treasures to be shared, unquote. You also pointed out how they contain a traditional beauty. Our current Catholic liturgy is only 40 years old and could be enriched by these. Why is the same charity generally not applied to Catholics hungering for a greater connection with our traditions through the Tridentine Mass? I realize this form of worship is not for every Catholic, but it's quite the contrast to the eager acceptance of Anglican traditions. And this is from Tom. Tom, you bring up a very good point. In many circles, the reintroduction of the Tridentine Mass is something that is dreaded. Now, it's welcomed by many, too. Don't underestimate how much it's welcomed. But there are some people who don't want it. Now, there are a couple reasons for it. One reason my own brilliant producer, Jason, had brought up. He said the Anglican way of doing things and the Anglican usage, as it's called, will not make any demands on other Catholics. So in the Catholic parishes, nobody's going to ask the pastor to do the Anglican usage. So it can be this old-fashioned form and this old-style English and very beautiful and uplifting English. And nobody will ask the pastor to do it, so it doesn't affect his life. And I think that that's a very valid point. Whereas with the Tridentine Mass, the pastors already have people asking, Father, would you learn how to do this? And some of them don't want to. So there's less of a demand on the time and attention of the pastor. That would be one thing. Secondly, for some people, the use of the Tridentine Mass is seen as a going backwards. I can't emphasize that to you enough. For some people, they see it as a going backwards, and they fear it. They fear it the way somebody might fear if you took the earth and began to reverse its rotation on the axis and made it go the other way around. That's how they feel about it. It's like reversing the axis of the earth. And they have a strong commitment to the future, and they see this as a hankering for the past. And so that's why some of them resist it as well. Now, here's the thing. It doesn't have to be a hankering for the past. It's a beautiful liturgy in the present. And it's something that we can use. The Pope has given general permission to use the Tridentine form of the Mass, the extraordinary form. And this is something that, for those who are interested, hopefully it will be available for them. And most dioceses, I think, have it available. It won't be every Sunday in every parish, but it will be available in a number of places. All right. We are now in paragraph 54 of Vita Consecrata. Now, Vita Consecrata means consecrated life, and this is on religious life, or the consecrated life. And you can get a free copy of this electronically from our website, EWTN.com. Go to the television tab at the website, click the television series, then scroll down to Threshold of Hope, click it there, and you'll see that under Threshold of Hope, we have this linked, and you can pull that into your computer and read it on your computer, or you can print it out, but you got to buy your own paper and ink. All right. Now, what we want to do is take a look at this paragraph 54. This begins a section. It's called Communion and Cooperation with the Laity. In the next 3 paragraphs, we'll be dealing with the relationship between religious and the laity, but as communion and cooperation. In recent years, one of the fruits of the teaching of the Church as communion has been the growing awareness that her members can and must unite their efforts. So, first of all, he's talking about how the Vatican Council spoke of the Church as a communion. That is, it's not just a social meeting. It's not a club. It's a place in which people are in communion with God And because they're in communion with God, they're also in communion with one another. That means that they have a union with one another. That's what communion means, to be in union with somebody else. And that should be a unity of hearts and minds as part of being in the church. It's not just belonging to this club. They say, okay, I belong to the Catholic group. No, it's something much more than that. Because we experience going to Holy Communion with Jesus, and we all are sharing in Jesus. There's a union among us. That's one of the reasons why I like the times of silence. After communion, when we return back to our pews, this is where a union is built up among us. And that this is a very important element of the church. That it's not just about us being a nice bunch of people who hang out together to think good thoughts. It's about being in communion with God and with each other. And therefore, they should unite their efforts. If you're in communion with God, you should work together. And that's going to be with a view to cooperation with each other and with an exchange of your gifts. When you live in a family, your family has a communion within itself. And at various points, like birthdays, anniversaries, Christmas, there are exchanges of gifts. Well, so also in the church, there should be an exchange of gifts. The various talents that people have should be exchanged in order to participate more effectively in the church's mission. See, this is going to be one of the other elements. The church is a communion and a community, but it has a purpose, a mission. That is to bring the whole world to Jesus Christ. That's our mission. Our mission is so that nobody goes to hell and everybody goes to heaven. Now, that's not a guarantee. And so that's why we have to work at it, to help convert sinners, to help bring people out of sinful ways of life, to help bring people out of lack of faith. This is our mission. And we need to use all of our gifts and cooperate among ourselves to live out that mission of bringing people to salvation. This helps to give a clearer and more complete picture of the church herself. If you think of the church as a political organization, that's why some people look at it. Oh, it's just about politics and money. That's all they want is our money. Well, if you look at it that way, you're going to be cynical about the church. For one thing, you'll think that it has more money than it does. You know, most of the money we get, we spend right away anyway. We've got to build churches, schools, hospitals, etc. So, you know, that kind of cynicism ignores the reality of people doing all kinds of great works, or with orphanages and so on, helping the poor, all these things. And it also, so we need to have this sense to get a clear picture of the church as a communion and on mission. And while rendering more effective the response to the great challenges of our time, we have tremendous challenges in our time. The family is breaking down horribly. Most of the children in some parts of our culture are born to single mothers. We have situations of tremendous violence. We just had that one boy who happened to be walking down the street and 4 other kids beat him to death. We have a violence. This is a tremendous problem. And the disregard for life. We have a tremendous problem with drugs. Tens of thousands of people are killed in Mexico over the drug trade. But that's connected to people using recreational drugs here. You know, so these are problems that are major problems, and there are many others. The economy, the culture, and all this, the licentiousness, the bad language, and there's so many things going on. And these are the great challenges, and we want to have an effective response to this. As a church, we want to respond to the culture and to all the things that need to go on and to make it better, because we want a culture that is holy. We don't want to resign ourselves to saying, well, this is the way the culture is. We can't do anything about it. That's not a Christian mentality. Christ died so we could do something about it. So this is going to be our mentality. What are we going to do to go ahead and do something about it? And that'll be thanks to the combined contributions of the various gifts of people. all the different talents especially. We're not talking about the money gifts. That is part of it, but that's a small part compared to the gifts of people's talent and sharing of who they are to build up their families, to build a drug-free society, to build a society of holiness and chastity and purity. Contacts with the laity, in the case of monastic or contemplative institutes, takes the form of a relationship that's primarily spiritual. Now he's changing the subject here, because he's talking about the exchange of gifts in general. But now he's going to talk specifically that religious, consecrated people have gifts to share with the laity and the laity with the consecrated. That there are gifts that we can share with religious, and religious can share with us. So that's going to be one of the things that he wants to do. Now, there are different kinds of religious, so there are different kinds of sharing. When you have contemplative religious, like the Carmelites and the Trappists, the relationship that they have with the laity is going to be a spiritual relationship. They'll be spiritual directors, retreat givers, or they'll offer the liturgy. And so it'll be a very spiritual relationship. Well, for institutes involved in the apostolate, that is in action, who are out in action doing various works, like running schools and social apostolates, these contacts also translate into forms of pastoral cooperation, so that the lay people will be cooperating. And I taught in Jesuit schools, and most of our teachers are laity. We are cooperating with the laity, and the laity are cooperating with us in running our schools. This is the way that it is. And this is also true in Catholic hospitals. You don't have mostly nuns running a Catholic hospital. It's mostly lay people. So what we want to do is see in these apostolates that the religious who run these schools, hospitals, orphanages, and other institutions would be cooperating with the laity, and both of them are using each other's gifts well. Members of secular institutes, lay or clerical, relate to other members of the faithful on the level of everyday life. So the various secular institutes like Opus Dei, they meet with everybody on everyday life, because they're not in a monastery or a religious house. They're not in a convent. They're in the world. And therefore, the different secular institutes meet with other laity on an everyday basis at their jobs and in other areas where they work and live. Today, often as a result of new situations, many institutes have come to the conclusion that their charism can be shared with the laity. See, that's one of the things that's going on, that in a lot of cases, the religious are sharing their charism as religious with lay people. And they do this in different ways. Sometimes they get to share intensely in the spirituality and mission of the institutes. And we've seen that historically with secular orders, like secular order Franciscans or third order Franciscans, secular or third order Carmelites, Benedictines, Dominicans. St. Catherine of Siena was a third order Dominican. Lots of people have been third order members of the Franciscans and other communities. And this is one way to do it. And these groups still exist, but now a new chapter is being opened up, and there's going to be some new possibilities in the way that the consecrated religious relate to the laity. There's some new things going on, and that's what he wants us to pay attention to. Now, these new experiences of communion and cooperation should be encouraged for various reasons. He wants the religious and the laity to cooperate with each other and share, not just in terms of doing the jobs, like working at the schools or hospitals, but also he wants them to share the spirituality of the religious group, so that the Franciscans teach Franciscanism and the Dominicans teach the Dominican spirituality, and so on with the other groups. So this is a good thing. First of all, they can in fact give rise to the spread of a fruitful spirituality beyond the confines of the Spirit Institute. So by the Institute, again, he always means the religious order. So outside of that institute, their spirituality can grow. People need spiritual life. This is one of the great things that the Catholic Church has, is different kinds of spirituality. We, more than most, I can't think of another church that has so many different kinds of spirituality. And having that spirituality is a gift. What it does is it teaches you a way of how to pray, how to discern the will of God, how to learn to listen to God. These are very important elements of spirituality. And this is something that the religious can teach the laity. And that's one of the things he wants. A lot of times lay people come to me and say, I don't know how to pray. I don't know what to do when I pray. Well, that's where you might join a Third Order Carmelite group or a Third Order Franciscan group and learn from them. And then also, if they learn that spirituality, then they'll be in a position to ensure the continuity in the church of the services typical of the Institute, so that the order or institute will have lay people who are helping to promote it. People who are Third Order Carmelites sometimes become First Order Carmelites or Second Order. They'll go from being secular Carmelites to joining the convent. Sometimes they find their vocation by being a member of the secular Carmelites or Third Order Dominicans and so on. So that's one way, but also it lets the rest of the world know this is what that spirituality is about, and this is what that spirituality is like. Another positive consequence will be to facilitate more intense cooperation between the consecrated persons and the laity in view of the Institute's mission. Now see, different institutes or different religious orders have different missions. So some schools, some teachers, some orders are teachers. Some nuns are focused primarily on teaching. And they can share not only the skills of teaching, that's one thing, to share the skills, but also the spiritual life. I had Franciscan sisters that taught us, and they teach differently than Dominican sisters. They have a different spirituality. Well, you want lay people to share that spirituality. At our Jesuit schools, oftentimes we have a Jesuit whose job is to teach the laity about our spirituality. That's his full-time work. So that the people who work with us and cooperate in our apostolate will also learn our way of proceeding in prayer and our way of spirituality and our way of thinking about the apostolate. So that's going to be another thing. It'll help to give a much more dynamic and intense cooperation. And moved by the examples of holiness of the consecrated members, laymen and laywomen will experience at first hand the spirit of the evangelical councils. Now, remember, the evangelical councils are poverty, chastity, and obedience. That belongs to the religious. And we don't expect the laity, especially the married, to live those vows. But contact with the people who are living those vows will help to encourage them, that is the lay people, to live and bear witness to the spirit of the Beatitudes. Now, the Beatitudes belong to all Christians. Blessed are the poor in spirit. It's not just for religious, that's for every Christian. And blessed are the peacemakers, and blessed are the meek, and blessed are those who show mercy, and blessed are those who are pure of heart. That belongs to everybody. Chastity belongs to, in terms of the gift of complete celibacy, that belongs to the religious and not to the married. But there's a purity and purity of heart that the laity do need to have, whether they're married or single. And that's something that they can learn more about by contact with the religious. That's what he wants, is for the religious to be able to have that kind of contact. And thus be encouraged to bear witness to the Beatitudes in order to change the world. That's the goal. How can we change the world? I mean, can you imagine if everybody in the world had the attitude, blessed are the poor in spirit? You wouldn't have thieves. You can walk down the street and not worry about somebody robbing you. And blessed are the peacemakers. If everybody had that mentality, that would transform the world. You wouldn't have to worry about being mugged or beat up like that poor kid in Georgia. So these are the kinds of things that we want. And he makes a footnote here of Lumen Gentium, which is the Constitution on the Church in Vatican II, paragraph 31, where it says, the laity, by their very vocation, seek the kingdom of God by engaging in temporal affairs and by ordering them according to the plan of God. They live in the world, that is, in each and in all of the secular professions and occupations. They live in the ordinary circumstances of family and social life, from which the very web of their existence is woven. Therefore, since they are tightly bound up in all types of temporal affairs, it is their special task to order and throw light upon these affairs in such a way that they may come into being and then continually increase according to Christ, to the praise of the Creator and the Redeemer. In other words, the laity are working in everyday life, and they bring the light of Christ to everyday things. Nothing should be outside of the range of God's love. Nothing is outside God's influence. This idea that you keep your religion over in church and the rest of it is secular, that's baloney sausage. We don't believe that. We want the light of Christ to come to every single aspect of our professions. Our politics should be affected by our religion. I don't want our politicians to affect religion too much, but I want our religion to affect our politicians. Let them run the post office. We'll take care of the church. But we want our Christianity to affect the way we vote, the way we think, the way we act in our businesses so that they're honest, all of that. And the Beatitudes should be able to bring about a change in the way we look upon everything that around us. All right. We're going to take a little break. We'll come back in a couple of minutes with some questions from our studio audience, so please stay with us. Thank you, and welcome back. We have a really nice audience here tonight, and we have a group of people from Louisiana, another group from California, and some scattered folks from different parts of the country. It's great to have all of you here, and we'd love to have you come and join us. If you come either as a big group, a small group, or a family or individual, we welcome you very much. It makes the show a lot more fun if you come over here. So contact our pilgrimage department if you can join us. We'll make sure we save you a seat. And the phone number is 205-271-2966. That's 205-271-2966. Or go to our website, www.ewtn.com. They'll help you find hotels, places to eat, which is always one of my favorites. I love eating. Anybody have the fried green tomatoes yet? See, aren't they good? See, they like them. So, and you got the other religious restaurants, Hamburger Heaven, Golden Rule of Barbecue. The Golden Rule, that's religious. All right, so anyway, come and join us there if you get a chance. Go down to Art's Barbershop where I get my hair cut. All right, let's take some questions from the studio audience. Let's start off with this lady here. Ma'am, where are you from?
From San Diego.
Hold the mic up to your mouth if you would.
From San Diego.
Great. And what's your question?
I appreciate your remarks or your statements about the faith being supposed to be, the spirituality supposed to be incorporated into every component of our life. But I noticed that among Christians and some Catholics even, that their faith, their spirituality is very strong when they're in church and when they're in the religious environment, but in their workplace and in some of the segments of their life, the spirituality does not seem to reflect their Christian faith or Catholic faith.
No, that's a common danger. That's the danger for, I think, every person. You know, one of the things about Christian maturity is that we very much need to learn how to integrate our faith. You know, our spirituality and our faith life has to be integrated. And that means bringing more and more elements. And I don't think that it happens all at once. I don't see it happening all at once. I see it happening by stages. And sometimes you realize only when you make mistakes that, you know, I've compartmentalized my life. And I'm not acting very nicely. And somebody else may tell me off because I'm not doing very nicely. But, you know, there is this need for constant integration. And that's part of that, to me, is one of the key models for understanding Christian growth. Integrating the faith into every aspect of life and not putting it into compartments so that we have the church compartment over here, my sexuality compartment over here, my business compartment over here, my politics over here. No. All this can be integrated. All this can be integrated, and that's part of growth. I have another question. Sir, where are you from?
From Cecilia, Louisiana, Father.
Great, good to have you here. And what is your question?
You mentioned the three evangelical virtues earlier.
Right.
And I was wondering, as a married layperson, how do you, I guess, balance living out the virtue of poverty without it conflicting with your role as a provider and a husband?
I was going to say, are you a dad?
No, sir, Father.
Oh, okay, because that's going to be one of the things. If you have kids, they'll take care of it. But there's something. You know, there are a number of ways in which that this has to go on. One of them is, you know, if you're preparing for a family, you know that you're planning on a family, that you're going to be thinking about money, not in terms of, oh, I got to spend as much money on myself before the kids come. Because once they come, they're going to take it all. See, there's going to be a kind of prudence, you know, that says, I'm going to plan for this so that, you know, I'll know what kind of house I want to be in when we have children so that they have the proper place to live and so on. And so that's going to be something that'd be very important. Another thing is in terms of the use of the money. What do you spend it on? There's legitimate needs for recreation. You know, you don't give up all recreation. They have recreation. You also have a sense of doing this with your wife. As a matter of fact, that's another part of the poverty, is that, you know, of marriage. You realize this isn't my money, and that's her money. What she brings home for work, she can spend. What I bring home, I can spend. No, this is our money. And that's also something of a conversion, you know, in marriage. We realize this is not mine, it's ours. And that's going to be a certain kind of poverty. There'll be another aspect in taking a look, how am I generous with the extras that I have? You know, there's so much that I think I need and I don't really need. And how am I generous to help those who are poor? How am I generous with the church and the needs of the church? How am I generous with my family members beyond my wife and children? You know, these are some of the ways in which we think about it. And instead of saying, I'm going to win the prize, I'm going to make as much money as I can, and I'll have more than anybody else in my family, and they'll all look up to me. No, they won't. They'll just be jealous. But they're not necessarily looking up to you because you have all the money. You know, that's not going to be the reality. And I think to have a sense, you know, how am I using this well for the glory of God? And that would be the way I'd put the question. How do I use the goods that I've got for the greater glory of God? That's the question. Does that help?
Yes. Thank you very much.
Yeah, good. We have one more question. First of all, where are you from?
Yes, Father. My name is Jerome Gilmartin, and I'm from Scranton, Pennsylvania, and of course, in the Scranton Diocese. And the question is having to do with spirituality. As you mentioned, the Church encourages us to grow in our spirituality, and I thought, since you've written about the New Age spirituality and some other kinds of false spiritualities. You might help us understand just how to recognize a problematic spirituality.
Sure. The number of spiritualities that are very problematic, and I would just give a couple of clues. Any spirituality that says we are God, that's a wrong answer. That's out. Anything that tries to make all of creation into God, wrong answer. God is not creation, and creation is not God. And what like the New Age movement does is confuse the two. And nature is beautiful. I love nature. I love being out in the woods. It's just wonderful. But it's not God. It's God's creature. So we've got to make sure that we don't have a spirituality that makes that kind of confusion. Another kind of spirituality that's going to be confusing and problematic is if morals are divorced from the spiritual life. That there's no link between the moral life and the spiritual life. That's a major problem. That's typical New Age, typical of the New Age movement, that they make up any morals they want and call it spirituality. That's superficial and dangerous because they'll allow a lot of things that are very negative, like drug use, etc. So those would be some clues that I would give at the outset. All right. Let us now finish up paragraph 55. Now, the participation of the laity often brings unexpected and rich insights into certain aspects of the charism. That is, the charism of the Institute. So, Franciscans have a certain charism for poverty. Your question as a layman about how to live, poverty as a layman, will evoke from them, a certain kind of insight into how to apply Franciscan values in the lay world. And that's going to enrich the charism of the Franciscans. So that's the kind of interaction that the Pope is saying is a good thing. And it leads to even more spiritual interpretation of it and helps to draw from it directions for new activities in the apostolate. So that the lay people will also ask questions about new ways to do things. And this can be very positive. And he wants to see that positive quality is there. In whatever activity or ministry they are involved, consecrated persons, that is the various kinds of religious, should remember that before all else, they must be expert guides in the spiritual life. That it's important, for instance, a hospital administrator to be a good hospital administrator. It's very important for them to be professional. But to be a Catholic hospital administrator, they also have to be able to lead in the spiritual life and pose the spiritual issues to the other people working at the hospital. That's going to be one of the things that they should be able to do. And in this perspective, they should cultivate the most precious gift of the Spirit. That this is something that is a great gift, for, the spiritual life. Cultivating the spiritual life of each individual lay person who's there. For their part, the laity should offer religious families the invaluable contribution of being in the world in a specific service. Again, the kinds of questions that you asked about how to integrate the spiritual life into everyday life so that it's not compartmentalized. That's the kind of contribution that you're also making by posing these questions, bringing these issues to the foreground, and reminding us religious that this is something that we have to pay attention to. Because it's, you've got a set of questions that are extremely important and must be valued. Now, paragraph 56 about associates and lay volunteers. This is another way of having religious and laity relate. A significant expression of lay people sharing in the richness of the consecrated life is their participation in the various institutes, and to do so in a new form called lay associates. So a number of religious orders now have lay associates. You're not a full member of the group with the 3 vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, but you can be an associate of the group. Or, in response to conditions present in certain cultures, you can also be people who share fully for a certain period of time the Institute's community life. In other words, in some cultures, you can live with a community as a full member without taking the vows. So that's another way that some people are doing this. So that's another way of participating in the religious life. And you also get to participate in the dedication to contemplation or the apostolate. So, for instance, somebody might join a Trappist monastery and live there as a layman for a number of years to learn their contemplation and prayer without joining the order, but live there among them. Now, or to live in an apostolate. I know we Jesuits have set up in some of our schools houses for young men who want to live like Jesuits, but still stay laymen. And they live in a building owned by the school. And they'll be able to teach at the school. And they share in our way of life. We make sure that they get to Mass and all the other aspects of religious life. But they don't join us. And they get a wage. So they don't take a vow of poverty. They get a small wage, but they take a lesser wage in order so they can serve God in this way. And that's a very nice way to do it. So they kind of live with us, and yet they still maintain their own identity. So that's another way of doing this. So you can be a lay associate who still lives at home in your own house, or it can be someone who actually lives in the community of the religious. Those are new possibilities. And this is something new. These are new experiments that are being tried in different places. However, in either case, it should be done in such a way that the identity of the Institute in its internal life is not harmed, so that you can do this without doing any damage to the religious life itself, so that they don't disrupt. It would be possible that they have too little understanding of what it's like to live in a community, and so they could be disruptive. Not because they intend to be, but they just don't understand how we do things in religious life, and some things might be awkward. So that's one of the things that he puts as a little aviso, a little warning. Now, this kind of voluntary service draws from the richness of the consecrated life, so that some of the aspects of the spiritual life of the consecrated is something that is given to these lay volunteers. They gain something from that without becoming full members. So they're still somewhat on the periphery in a way, but they're sharing in the life of the community. It is, however, necessary to provide proper formation. That's always an issue, making sure that these volunteers get proper formation, that they learn something. You don't just plot them into a community or make them associates without teaching them about St. Ignatius Loyola or St. Francis of Assisi or St. Dominic or any other religious order, whatever it might be. You have to teach them what was the reason this order was founded. What are the ways of prayer? What are the ways of celebrating the Eucharist? And where the importance of the Eucharist in the community. All of these things have to be integrated. And that's done by proper formation of the volunteers. So that you make them competent. So that they know what they're doing. For instance, those young men who work at our schools. They know how to teach. They have to learn how to be good teachers. Good disciplinarians. Handle their subject. Know how to deal with the content. So they have to be competent. That's for sure. But always to have supernaturally motivated intentions. They're doing this for Jesus. That's going to be the key thing. They do this not because it's just a cool thing to do for a year, or I can't afford an apartment, so I'll just stay with the Jesuits for a year. No, that's no good. No, you have to have a sense of a supernatural motivation. I'm doing this to serve the Lord Jesus Christ. That's what I want. And in their projects, they need to have a strong sense of the community, that this is a community activity and not just a bunch of individuals running around. It's a community apostolate. And they also need to have a sense of the church, that they're not just serving to fulfill their own desires, but they're part of the church as a whole. And they want very much to be part of the church. And they have to understand that they have a role in the church and they're there to support the church. So that's going to be another element. Moreover, it should be borne in mind that initiatives involving lay persons at the decision-making level, in order to be considered the work of the specific institute, must promote the ends of that institute and be carried out under its responsibility. All right, now what's he talking about? There are certain situations at Catholic schools and hospitals, as an example. Again, these are the things I know the best. At a number of our Catholic schools, where the principal is no longer a Jesuit, or even the president is not. There may not be enough Jesuits to be the president of the school. And so a layman can be the president, or a layman can be the principal. That's fairly common these days. And so, because, being a Jesuit's not enough. You have to know how to be a principal or a president. And we don't have enough guys who are doing that. By the way, anybody interested in doing that kind of work, the society needs you. But it is possible that there'll be lay people who are at these decision-making levels. They're going to be making the decisions about how the school runs. Well, if that's the case, then they have to promote the purpose of the society. They can't be trying to work in a Jesuit school and at the same time promoting atheism. That would be crazy. They can't be promoting communism. That would be nuts. And so they have to promote what the Society of Jesus wants to promote. Doing everything for the greater glory of God. That's our motto. Ad maiorem Dei gloriam, to the greater glory of God. And that has to be the mentality that they learn. The same thing if they're, of course, Dominicans, Franciscans, Benedictines, and so on. That they have to make sure that they understand the specific institute. And they must promote the ends of that institute. And they must be carried out under its responsibility. So, for instance, even when the president may not necessarily be a member of the religious order that owns the school, the board of trustees still has a number of members, and they have to answer to them that this is one of the boards of trustees are one of the ways in which the religious, like say the Jesuits, would have an influence on the president if he's not a Jesuit. You can have an influence on them, and they have to be responsible to the board of trustees so that they're doing things for the greater glory of God. Therefore, if lay persons take on a directive role, they will be accountable for their actions to the competent superiors. And in fact, in schools that I know of, where, say, the principal or the president is not a Jesuit, that person still meets with the provincial. When the provincial comes to the school to meet with people, the provincial meets with them to talk to them about what's going on in the school and how they're directing it. So they have to be responsible to the superiors. That should be the way it is. It is necessary for all this to be examined and regulated by special directives in each institute. So they have to come up with rules and regulations to order this, so it's done correctly. And to be approved by higher authority, by the Superior General or even by Vatican, if that's necessary. But usually it's not the Vatican, it's usually the superiors of the order. And that these rules and regulations should indicate the respective responsibilities of the institute itself. In other words, the order. What is their responsibility? What do they have to do? And then what do the lay people involved have to do? That should be clear. Consecrated persons sent by their superiors or remaining subject to them can also take part in specific forms of cooperation in lay apostolates. So sometimes there are apostolates run by lay people, and they're already established by lay people. And religious can go work for them. That's a possibility. And so that's one of the things that he's saying here. This is especially true in organizations and institutions that work on the margins of society, say with refugees, with the poor, immigrants, and so on. So these are some of the things that religious can do. And especially if they're have the purpose of alleviating human suffering. So say a group of laymen start a hospital. Some religious can go and work with them. Such collaboration, if prompted and sustained by a clear, strong Christian identity, that's going to be one thing. They have to have a clear, strong Christian identity. You don't want religious going to work for some big investment company. You know, that's not that it's bad to work for an investment company. That's a good thing. But that's not for religious. You know, we're not there to work for a government office. For the religious to work there, it should have a religious approach and have a religious identity and religious purpose. But also, the lay people who work there should be respectful of that religious and the different elements of that religious person's life, so that they can make the radiant power of the gospel shine forth brightly, even in the darkest situation of human life. That the religious can be there and truly be a Franciscan, or truly be a Dominican, truly be a Benedictine, or whatever order they might be, and exercise that gift in that lay apostolate and help bring God's light to it. And they'll be an asset. I know Catholic Answers is a good example, where it's a lay organization specifically oriented toward religious purposes. And they've had a number of priests come and work with them as chaplains. So that would be a good example of that kind of thing going on. Also, in recent years, many consecrated persons have become members of one or other ecclesial movements. Opus Dei, well, not so much Opus Dei, that wouldn't fit in this. Ecclesial movements would be things like the Charismatic Renewal, Cursillo movement, the Marian movement, and a number of other movements like this. The Communion and Liberation. These are different ecclesial movements that have spread in our time. And they usually draw benefit, especially in spiritual renewal. So a lot of religious, have been involved in it. I've been involved in some of these movements. Nonetheless, it cannot be denied that sometimes this causes uneasiness and disorientation at the personal communal level, especially when the experiences come into conflict with the demands of common life or with the spirituality of the institute, a religious order. So that's one of the things that you have to be sensitive to, that just because a Franciscan joins the Charismatic Renewal, that's not bad. But if it disrupts the community life, he starts holding a prayer meeting in his cell at 3 a.m, then there's going to be a disruption. That's not going to be so good. So, you have to have a sense of, being open to the Spirit, but at the same time not waking the monks up. It is therefore necessary to take care that membership in these ecclesial movements does not endanger the charism or discipline of the Institute of Origin. That's going to be one thing. And that's something in Fraternal Life and Community, paragraph 62 says, ecclesial movements in the broadest sense of the term, endowed with lively spirituality and apostolic vitality, have attracted the attention of some religious who become involved in them, sometimes deriving fruits of a spiritual renewal or apostolic dedication and a reawakening of the vocations. Sometimes, however, such involvements have also brought divisions into the religious community, and that's not going to be helpful. So you have to have a sense of balance. And all that must be done with the permission of the superiors. Now, that should go without saying, but it needs to be said, that the superior has to give permission for the religious to be involved. Say if he's going to be giving retreats to a Cursillo group or charismatic group, it needs the permission of the superior to be doing this. And keep the superior up to date. Let the superior know all that's going on. And also, they have to do this with full intention of accepting their decisions. When the superior tells you something that you don't want to do, you do it anyway. Sometimes the superior said you can't go to prayer meetings every Friday because this is when the school football games are, and you got to be at the football games to be a monitor. You got to take care of your job here. You can't neglect that. Well, then you have to obey the superior. Oh, but the prayer meeting is more spiritual than the football game. Well, maybe it is. That probably is true. But you got your job to do. so you obey the superior, and all these kind of things. And I speak of this from a certain amount of personal experience about such things. Well, may God bless all of you and keep you in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Thank you.